Okay. So I'm gonna try to make this as fast as possible. I'm gonna be doing like a review thing where I'm gonna read an article a day and then I'll post a video on my story or whatever with me talking about it. So today we read the 13 Principles of Game Design by Matt Elmer. It was posted on Gamasutra in 2009. We're just gonna jump right into talking about it. He organized them in categories. We're gonna start with the foundational category, which is ironically the last like three. So the 13th principle he lists is appeal. Appeal is important because whenever you are making something, anything artistic, you need to understand who your audience is while you're making it. Because if you understand that, you can understand that whenever you hand something to your audience, they're going to be expecting certain things. And if you're able to meet those expectations or change those existing ones within your work, it makes the experience a lot more powerful. And then we have communication. So this one was kind of vague in terms of how he presented it. I took it as how we communicate our ideas to the player. And that can be like dumbed down to how are we teaching the player how to play our game and how are we introducing them to new mechanics. That's how game designers communicate with the player. And it's important to make sure that communication is clear and concise, as well as usually you want it to be in game because not a lot of people read, to be blunt. And then we have the player. So this one's kind of obvious, like, yeah, the player is the fucking guy who's doing the shit. He matters, but not like a player can still just be a dude holding a controller. What you really want is to give the player power. So when considering how to give the player power, you don't just want to give them more items or whatever. I can give you an interact button, but if that interact button is your only way to interact with the game, but I give you 23 different things to do with that interact button, like think about just in Gary's mod or Half-Life, how most of the interaction or the fun in that game is based around the physics engine, just doing shit in the thing. And that's like a really, it's a so-so example, but it gets my point across. It's important to consider where the player fits in and how they alter the experience of your game. And that can be considered when you're making the game, before you're making the game, but it's like you need to outline what the player is going to be altering within your experience, you know? So the next category we're going to go to is method. This is actually like sort of like problem solving ideologies for how to approach problems within a game. And these don't have to be mutually exclusive either. So he lists two here: linear design and component breakdown. So linear design is actually just it's as simple as it sounds. You know, you work and then you keep working and then you hit a problem and then you deal with that problem and then you keep going forward. And then component breakdown is where you systematically break down all the potential. Break down all the solutions in a hierarchical order manner. This is usually done in the pre-production phase before you start doing anything. You want to think about potential problems then and then make solutions for them. And they don't have to be like mutually exclusive, as I had said earlier. So he used the example of if you are designing a game, sometimes a publisher will say, okay, I need this thing in the game. And they're the person with the money, so you're like, fuck, I guess, dude. So what you have to do is you have to use linear design to compare, okay, they want this thing, does it fit here? How can I get it to fit? What can I do to make it fit better? If it doesn't fit, does that mean I have to change everything, or what do I have to change to get it fit? So that's what linear design is. Component breakdown would sort of be if the publisher gave you that in the first place, like in pre-production or before you started working. And it was like, I need this. And you're like, okay, we can figure out where it can fit in our existing structure without having to change much, right? That's not because there isn't something already there, but it's because we have all the solutions laid out that we can kind of just take one out and then just put that one in, you know? Anyways, so the next two categories are really short. They're just one. So he then talks about environment, which is essentially just the space. And the principle he lists here is spacing. He had said that it's important to recognize that both the space in-game and on the player screen is limited. That doesn't just mean for UI, that doesn't just mean for like the actual space in-game, but, well, it does. But what I'm basically trying to say is that in-game space and screen space are both part of your game, and it's important to consider how much is being taken up of both spaces at a time. Because if Doom had 23,000 imps on your screen at the same time and you couldn't jump, that would be overwhelming. If Doom had pop-up ads that came up, that would be annoying because they're blocking your screen. But those are dumb examples, but they're getting the point of space is limited within a game, so you need to make sure that the space you do take up is worth it. And the more space you take up, the more you have to justify taking that much space. So the next one he talks about is progression. I'm not reading from the article, to be clear. I took notes. So the next article he's talking about is, or not article, the next principle he's talking about is pacing. Looking at this, something he had said was to spread out moments of high concentration. He doesn't mean high concentration in terms of like enemy concentration. He means like when the player has to be very focused, we want a few of those moments spread out maybe throughout the entire game. Because if I throw 5 heavy rooms at you, then you're gonna be tired. You're not gonna want to play for very long, you know? That doesn't mean concentration is bad, though. What we want to do is we want to keep you in concentration. It's a state of consciousness called flow, where we want to keep you having enough fun that you're still being challenged, but not having too little of fun that not too little of fun. We want to keep you challenged in that you are still finding difficulty playing the game in some way. And we also want to keep you from being bored. Boredom can come from a lot of things, where it's like, I don't know what to do, so I'm bored, so I'm closing the game. Frustration can come from, I don't know what to do, I'm gonna close the game. But basically what's pacing is mentioning is that it's important to spread moments of high concentration, moments when the player really has to be focused across the entire game. Also, I'm sorry if you can hear my roommate. And the next section is the largest. It's called direction. This is how we direct gameplay. At least that's how I interpret it based on all the principles within it. So we start with sound, and this one's pretty simple. It's saying that the sound, anything that's making a sound, should match the player's existing mental model of what that sound is. He argues that maybe this could be sound design, but he mentions it in gameplay design, and specifically in direction, because sound is it's a critical thing that a lot of people miss, myself included. And it's such a huge part of like our experience that you don't really notice it until you mute a game and then you don't hear anything. But interestingly enough, you really only notice sound when it's not there. If I play the same soundbite like at one point in a game and then play it at another, you're really not gonna notice. That's just a little tidbit. And then after sound is physics. This is a pretty obvious one, but physics is like our baseline for how we expect things to work in an environment. So if I walk up to a box, I'm expecting it to move. If I try to walk over a can, I'm expecting it to roll over. I have these expectations because I know in real life, if I hit a can, I'm going to get a reaction from it. And if I don't, that's immediately, it's not like breaking my immersion, because sometimes immersion isn't what I play a game for, but it's a part of the experience that's being taken away that's so easily implemented that it's not very enjoyable, I want to say. So the next one he talks about is overlapping events and behaviors. What he's specifically mentioning with this is that in order for things to feel dynamic, you really need to have more moving parts that stack, if that makes sense. So what is exactly that mean? Let's say you're playing a level and you get to the end of that level and you get an ending for that level. If you replay that level, you should be able to get a different reaction than when you played it first. This would be an overlapping behavior with how the game reacts to the player. I think that's a bad example, actually, so let's not use that. He specifically cites like story events here, like having, he specifically said, a king on their deathbed, a coup about to happen within the kingdom, and the kingdom is also at war, right? Those are 3 overlapping events that revolve around the royalty of the kingdom, and the player would be like smack dab in the middle of it. So maybe that makes more sense, but I took it as like, the more things that are shifting within your game, in terms of story, gameplay, whatever, the better. Because that makes the player feel like they're doing things in it, rather than it being static. He next mentions believable events and behaviors. So, for this, I'm just going to read mine, and then we can... every event and behavior within your game must meet the expectations of the player. So this goes back to what I was talking about with physics, where it's like I have an expectation of when I walk into a can, except now apply that to the entire game. And that's not with just physics either. If, for example, I have you shoot a target consistently in one level, in the next level, if I show you a target, you're going to shoot it instinctually because that's what I trained you to do. And if you shoot the target and it's not, like, it doesn't do anything, even if that target is not critical to the objective, it should do something because you are set up to expect a reaction out of that target, right? That's sort of what that means. Expectations that you set within your game must be kept. So I'm gonna read like a top one and then there's like a sub one. So the second one would be anticipation, which is with any behavior, you need to factor in time to communicate the change to the player, right? This just allows the player to prepare. But then he talks about in like the third principle, announcement of change. This is just saying that whenever a change happens in the game, we should be communicating it to the player, but not all. If something's happening super frequently, like if a door, trying to think, if a door is opening every single level, then maybe you don't need to let the player know through a cutscene every time that door opens. Or maybe you give them the option to skip the cutscene. But it's essentially saying that if an event is so frequent that it's happening at a rate where notifying the player every single time would be annoying, then don't do it. The player already knows it's happening because they've seen it happen so many times. And then finally, the first one, or I guess last in our case, is the focal point. So the focal point provides a central focus for the player. It's what they're going to be doing, while also allowing for secondary subject matter. So I'm going to use the example of Valorant because I play it a lot and it also sort of works here. So Valorant has two objectives for both teams. Defenders, don't let them plant, kill the enemy team. Don't let them plant would probably be considered the primary, and then the secondary would be kill the player. And then on the attacking side, they have the same secondary, but instead they're planting the spike, right? So those two objectives are sort of like you still have your primary and secondary, but there's an interesting thing that happens when the spike gets planted, right? So when the spike gets planted, a giant thing pops up in the UI that is the spike beeping. You can hear the spike beeping if you're within like a quarter of the map area that it's in, right? So the idea, I think, with that is that you're shifting the focus of the focal point to the spike entirely. While the secondary subject matter for attackers of kill the defenders is still there, the defenders are almost entirely focused on the spike, right? So it's sort of like, because the spike is the center of everybody's attention, it facilitates the secondary subject matter really well. That's all I got. I don't know. I hope you liked it. I don't think anybody's gonna, whatever.